Good evening to you. Thanks once again for your time. The St. Augustine's probe, this seems to be an epicenter of the virus in KwaZulu-Natal. How difficult is it to actually locate the specific source of an infection cluster like this?
Yes, it's quite a complicated situation, but just so that it's clear, I was asked by the Director General of Health Department, National Health Department, to go and have a look at the situation at St. Augustine's, which I did in the weekend and submitted my report to the Minister on Sunday night. I am not doing anything further at St. Augustine's. I'm not employed by St. Augustine's, as has been suggested by your own broadcast. I was just there for a short investigation in the weekend. So what the situation there is, it's about ensuring the reduction of nosocomial spread of any particular disease. So it's just the standard infection control measures. But it's quite a complex set of issues in investigating that sort of situation. It can't be done quickly. It needs a lot of detailed study, a lot of laboratory research that will eventually give us clear direction as to what happened.
I mean, when you look at something like this, is it possible to say this was, patient zero, as the films put it, or is it not always possible to do that?
Yeah, it's not easy to make those kinds of conclusions just off the top of your head. I would say that a very detailed investigation is required. As I gather, the KwaZulu-Natal Provincial Department of Health is working on the issue with them and has a systematic approach to resolving the problem. And I think we can just look to that to solve and address the issues. Because, St. Augustine's today, you don't know which hospital will be next.
It's only 100 days ago today that the World Health Organization was first notified about strange cases of pneumonia in Wuhan in China. And we know now that that was the first cases of the COVID-19 virus, a virus which, as you've explained to us, didn't exist in the human population before that. The world has literally changed in 100 days since that moment.
Absolutely. When you think about it, took a little virus to change everything that we think about in a particular way. It has changed the way we interact with our friends, with our family. It changes where we travel to. It changes how we look at any surface. It changes your thoughts about every time you touch a door handle. This is a different world. And in the space of 100 days, our world has been upended. And I think it indicates to us just the enormity of the challenge of dealing with epidemics, and particularly when you have a pandemic where every country in the world, or almost every country, is affected.
I think it might say several things. Firstly, we simply were not as prepared as we should have been, despite some warnings by people in powerful positions that a pandemic like this would be something we had to guard against. At the same time, I suppose we shouldn't overdo it and ask ourselves, in 5 years, where will we be? I mean, by 5 years from now, the world again will be in a very different place. And generally speaking, and I am an optimist about humanity's resilience, we'll probably be on top of this thing in quite a good way.
Yeah, I'm very optimistic too, like you. But if you think about it, in the early 2000s, there were warning signs that we were going to experience a global flu pandemic. And that was scary. The thought that we could have a flu pandemic where millions of people would be infected with flu was just a challenge that was enormous. And so all of the countries in the world were notified that we had this potential for a flu pandemic. And there were different flus circulating at the time, H5N1, and so countries were asked to do pandemic flu preparedness. At that time, I chaired our National Advisory Group on Immunization for South Africa, and we started flu preparedness. We started talking about stockpiling drugs, establishing the infrastructure to make a vaccine quickly. All of the things that we're talking about now are things we talked about 15, 20 years ago. That infrastructure and those discussions we had, in my view, were nothing compared to what we've had to do to deal with the coronavirus. The coronavirus has turned out to be on a scale that was unimaginable because of its respiratory route of infection, the fact that its reproductive rate, in other words, the number of people that get infected from each infected person is high, in the order of 2 to 3, and the way in which you rapidly spread this virus and the way in which the 5% or so of the population require quite substantial medical care. So that combination made this deadly, and nothing we could have done has given us the preparedness to deal with exactly this situation. So what have we learned? We've learned many lessons. The first is we need global surveillance. We need to be able to heed warnings. The warnings were there. We just didn't heed them, and we didn't see them for what they were. We thought they were little red flags. Actually, there were millions of red flags waving at us, but we just didn't piece it. We didn't join the dots to figure it out. The second is, as each country, we have to have plans in place how to deal with this. And the third is we have to have the infrastructure to make vaccines quickly, because it's only really a vaccine to ensure that our population has the antibodies and the protection that gives us long-term protection.
It's going to be, and I'm sure there is going to be time when there's going to be all sorts of recriminations. Why didn't this government do that? Why didn't this person in government do this? And heed all the planning that we should have done. At the same time, as you say, the scale of this, if you had said to people 10 years ago, this is how much money we need to spend, people would have said, we need to spend that money on HIV, we need to spend it on tuberculosis. That's a much better way to spend the money. It shows you, and I'm going back to the 100 days now, it shows you the level of shock that this has produced, the fact that it has come on such a scale in just 100 days.
You're absolutely right. That, you know, it's like death. You know, we all know we're going to die, but you know, we don't think about it every day, and we don't sort of plan for it in a very structured way. So we have to think about the future of how we're going to deal with pandemics like this, and we've got to put in place the mechanisms to deal with it. But ultimately, it's going to take political will. And I think, if anything, that what we've seen in this epidemic has been how some countries have really made a mess of how they're tackling this pandemic. I mean, the US is a classic example of what not to do in so many of what actions have been taken. And in the UK, similarly. But on the other hand, South Korea has shown us how you can tackle this problem and deal with it. And then when I come closer home, I have to say, having to deal with the minister, the president, the functionaries, the people on the ground, and the nurses, the doctors in the clinic, I have to say, I'm truly proud to be a South African. I'm proud of how we have chosen to be proactive. I'm proud of the way we've chosen to take a scientific approach to this problem. And I'm proud that we have not buckled, but stood firm and stood resolute and have dealt with this problem one at a time.